Hello, hockey fans. This is Mark Willand. Before we begin the show, just a reminder that the Pro Hockey Alumni podcast supports the Warrior for Life Fund charity. If you follow social media, you saw a recent alumni weekend series between the Boston Bruins and New York Ranger legends to benefit the Warrior for Life Fund and the Navy SEALs Foundation. Through the game of hockey, the Warrior for Life Fund provides programs and infrastructure that helps military families cope with the unique challenges of combat, extended deployments, and disabilities. The Warrior for Life Fund will memorialize the history and heritage of military service and honor those who have unselfishly given the ultimate sacrifice. We are proud to be associated with these real-life heroes. To learn more, please visit warriorforlifefund.org. Thank you.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, a special hello goes out to the Director of Media for the Boston Bruins alumni, Mr. Mark Willand. Nice to see you, Marky.
Welcome to the Pro Hockey Alumni Podcast, the voice of hockey legends. This is the classic hockey show for classic hockey fans. We celebrate the history of the game with stories told by the select few who actually lived it. Get ready for an all-access pass to the heart of the hockey universe. Episode 55 of the Pro Hockey Alumni Podcast features part 2 of our two-part discussion with Gary Suitcase Smith, one of the NHL's premier goaltenders and most fascinating characters of the 1960s and 70s. In this episode, Gary gives us amazing and humorous insights into the second half of his career with eye-opening tales from his days with the Chicago Blackhawks, Vancouver Canucks, Washington Capitals, Minnesota North Stars, and the Winnipeg Jets. As he did in part 1, Gary delivers an honest, no-holds-barred look at his life in big league hockey in the 1970s. Also known as Axe for his stick-wielding ways, Gary was the co-winner of the Vezina Trophy in 71-72 with Chicago, and NHL All-Star 1975 with Vancouver, and an Avco Cup champion with the Winnipeg Jets in 1979. In addition to his on-ice accomplishments, Gary is remembered as a fun-loving and colorful netminder who is popular with teammates and fans alike. If you love classic hockey, you'll love this discussion with Gary Smith. Remember, home base for the show is prohockeyalumni.org, and you can also reach us anywhere on social media at Pro Hockey Alumni. Your comments, ratings, and reviews on iTunes are extremely valuable in increasing the visibility of the show. I read all your comments, and they are greatly appreciated. Now, let's talk classic hockey with Gary Smith. But you end up, Gary, in Chicago as a member of the Blackhawks, a completely different situation, one of the league's best teams. And now, rather than playing 70-plus games a year, you're backing up one of the all-time great goaltenders, Tony Esposito. I was curious of what Tony was like to be a goaltender partner with the Blackhawks.
Well, I have to tread lightly here. First of all, when you're a goalie, you want to play, and you can look at my career and you can see that I want to play. I don't want to sit on the bench. Mm-hmm. You can look at Tony's career, and he wants to play. When I went to Chicago, I told you how screwed up I was. Chicago, first of all, in Chicago, I had a great team. And Bobby Hall, Makita, Bill White and Pat Stapleton as a good pair of defensemen who ever played the game. Mm-hmm. They were as good as Pronger and whatever the guy's name was, just inducted into the Hall of Fame with the Ducks. I can't remember his name now, but his partner. Niedermeyer, yeah. So that's what they were. They were just so great. But Tony wanted to play, and I wanted to play. So in my first 9 games with Chicago, I got something like 4 shutouts. And Tony went to Billy Ray. I know because Billy Ray was our coach, and I know because I used to go to the track with Billy Ray, and I talked to Billy Ray. And he said, Tony came to me, and he said that he's got to play. He's the goalie here. And he said he's taken us this far, and so at this point you're going to be the backup. After I'd won all my 9 games, and I had 4 shutouts or something like that. Mm-hmm. So I said, okay, and I'm rooming with Tony. And so we got along good as roommates and stuff like that, but I wanted to play. And and Tony would get pissed off if I play. So for the next 2 years, I played only on the road, only against the best teams. So we have a good year that year, and the President's Trophy, I ended up playing 25 games. He plays the rest, 26 games, I think he played the rest. And I ended up getting 5 shutouts, or 5 or 6 shutouts. And I know I got a shutout in my last game. And then he's playing in the last game, and he's got 15 shutouts. He has a record 15 shutouts. So between us, we had 14 shutouts anyway. He has a shutout going into the 3rd period. And I don't know, there was a questionable goal scored on him, so it seemed to me that he was not getting the shutout to, for us to share the shutout record with him. That's what it seemed like to me. Mm-hmm. So we go back the next year, same thing. He's got to play all the time. I looked at the records, how many games I played. I played all of them on the road, and all of them on the road, and all against the toughest teams in the league. And so basically, I went to Billy, who was my friend, and I said, Billy, this isn't working out. I'm getting older, and I got to play every day. And so he said, okay. So basically, I blame Tony in one way because he's being selfish, but I don't blame Tony in another way because he wanted to play. And that's what made him the star that he was, because he wanted to play and he wanted to win so much. So we got along, but, Tony doesn't know this. I never said it to Tony, so it's, they say I have to tread lightly, and I had a chance to take over from Tony a couple of times, maybe one time especially. We lost the first 2 games in the playoffs against the Rangers in the first round, I guess it was, and and when we went back to New York, we lost them at home. And Billy called me in his room, and he said, I'm going to play you tomorrow night. And so that game, I had a chance to take over from Tony. And I made the stupidest mistake I ever made in hockey. And we lost the game 2-1. And so then he played, so we were down 3 games, and then he played the 4th game, and we were out. But I had a chance. If I would have played well that night, I could have taken over from Tony. Mm-hmm. And I didn't. It was my own fault. I mean, I played well. I was a second star, but I let one bad goal and I made a mistake, and then he went with Tony the 3rd game. But I felt all my career after that I could have taken over from Tony if I would have won that game.
Right, and just the hands of fate. And a lot of, you remind me when you tell me these stories how much pressure there is, how the fine line between being a starter and not being a starter, and et cetera, et cetera. So many times in your career, things can go one way or the other. Who drafts you, who trades you, et cetera, et cetera. And this is one more example of that. But one question I wanted to ask you about your Blackhawks experience. Your first year there, Bobby Hull is there. What's it like facing Bobby Hull in practice? Did he...
No problem. I played with Bobby Hull in Chicago just for 1 year. Then he jumped to the WHA the second year there. But Bobby was playing against in the game. It was a nightmare because he had such a great shot, such a great hockey player, and it was always high. And he's on record of saying that that he would fire one around the guy's head just about always to make the guy, stand up a little bit on their skates, the goalie. But in practice, he's the easiest guy to play with you could ever play against. He just comes and shoots right at your pads, just a little flick shot. And great guy. Played with him in Winnipeg, too, and he was the same in Winnipeg after winning all those trophies in Winnipeg. And I think Bobby Orr is the best hockey player ever, and I think Bobby Hull is the second best.
Well, Gary, your career takes another positive turn after the 73 season. As you noted, you requested a trade, and you are traded for Dale Talon and King Kong Korab from Chicago to Vancouver, and all of a sudden you're playing 66 games that first year, and in the second year, 74-75, you're an NHL All-Star. The team wins the Smythe Division Championship. You play 72 games. You get a lot of votes for the most valuable player. Many people felt you should have been the most valuable player that year. Talk about the situation in Vancouver and how things turned so positively, both for yourself personally and the franchise.
Well, we had a good team in Vancouver and a good bunch of guys. And we had a good, when we first went there, the coach was Bill McCreary and the general manager, Hal Lako. And basically, they had to straighten some things out, and they fired Bill, which I think was a mistake. They should have maybe fired Hal as a general manager. And so the first year, we went there, and I don't even know if we made the playoffs the first year. I can't remember. But they made a few deals. The big thing that Vancouver did is they hired Phil Maloney to be the general manager and coach. And it was the first time out there in a lot of years, I guess, that the general manager and the coach got along. And so he was a big plus. And he let us do anything we want. And the problem was he was probably too loose on us as a taskmaster. Certainly it was on me anyway. Mm-hmm. And so we had a pretty good year the first year. And then the second year we led the league and we beat Chicago out for first place. And I can remember going into Chicago and having a little bit of a rivalry. And so it turned really good in the second year. That's the year I made the All-Star team and at halfway for the All-Star game. Actually, there was 4 goalies that year that had big years. Ken Dryden, Rogie Vachon, myself, and Bernie Perrant. Right. So I think you could have picked any of those guys to be MVP. Bobby Clark actually said in his speech for receiving the MVP, he said, "Thank you very much, but Gary Smith should have won it." And I thought that was pretty nice of him to say for a guy I absolutely hated. And hated to play against and tried to chop him and get him every time I possibly could. But anyway, we had a real good year, and we ended up playing against Montreal in the first round. I can remember we didn't know who we were going to play against, so we flew back to Toronto from Vancouver overnight, and my roommate at the time was Don Lever. And there was another game on the Sunday, and however that game went, then we were going to have to play either Montreal or Philadelphia. And I wanted to play against Philadelphia because, they were a tough team to play against, but they might beat you 5-4, 3-2, or 2-1, or something like that. And Montreal might beat you 10-0. So as a goalie, I wanted to play against Philadelphia, and I said to my roommate, Don Lever, I said, "Who do you want to play against?" And he said, "Are you kidding me?" He said, "I don't want to play against Montreal. I don't want to go into Philadelphia and get the shit beat out of me." And so I said, "Oh, okay." So I understand what everybody else on the team was thinking about, but it turned out we had to play against Montreal, and Montreal, of course, had the best team, and they were in the middle of winning 30 4 or 5 Stanley Cups or whatever it was. And so we go back there, and I had a real bad groin the last part of the year, and Kenny Lockett was the other goalie. And so he had played the last few games, and he played fantastic. And he set a shutout record over 2 games and something for the Canucks, which was a record for a long time until Luongo broke it. So it took that many years, 20 or 30 some years to be broken. So they played him the first game, and we lost 6-2. So that was because he had played so good for us to get there.
Right.
And then they played me the second game, and I stood on my head. It was one of those games, that came along once every 15 years or something, and won the game in Montreal. So we're going back home tied with Montreal, and in both games in Vancouver, we were tied 1-1 at the end of 2 periods. So they could have gone either way, but they were the Montreal Canadiens and we were the Vancouver Canucks, so they beat us the 2 games in Vancouver, and then we went to overtime in the 6th game back in, I guess it was the 5th or 6th game back in Montreal. They beat us in overtime, so we were out. And then the next year, we had big hopes and everything, and basically we were flying till Christmas, and it's a well-known story that I screwed up at the Christmas party with the owner's wife and Mrs. Griffiths, and I admit I did. I didn't say the things that were attributed to me to say, because I'd never be smart enough to think of those things. That was dreamed up by our publicity director, but I did say things I shouldn't have said to the owner, and you don't do that, so they had to get me out of Vancouver. So I was there the rest of the year before they could make a deal, and they not only got rid of me in Vancouver, they got rid of all my friends too. So
oh wow,
it set Vancouver back probably at least 10 years in their development, and maybe more, maybe even longer. But so they made a deal with me. I went to Minnesota for Cesar Maniego, which was probably a poor deal for both teams. Cesar is a great friend of mine, great goalie. I think he and I are comparable. Our careers were comparable, and but he was the goalie that made Minnesota, and I wasn't able to equal his playing like he did in Minnesota, and he wasn't equal to playing like I did in Vancouver.
Yeah, and in the situation, and first of all, Gary, I know we've gone a little over what I requested, but are you okay for a few more questions?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, great, because this has been fantastic, and I really appreciate it.
I appreciate it, too.
When you talk about the Minnesota situation, they had, prior to your arrival, done something, I guess, similar to what Vancouver was doing at the time. They had got rid of a lot of their classic players, the Bill Goldsworthys, the Danny Grants, et cetera. So they were rebuilding. That was not an easy situation for you to step into. You end up in Washington with the Capitals, another young developing team, but they too are struggling a little bit. And you have a coach, Tom McVie, who comes into our story later, but would seem to be a coach that you got along with very well.
Oh, yes. But Minnesota, basically, Ted Harris was the coach there who couldn't stand me. And so he right off the bat, he thought I wasn't trying or something like that. I don't know what it was, but so he just didn't like me, so I didn't get to play much there. They had a real good goalie named Pete Lepresti, who was really underrated. People don't realize how great he was. And so he had a pretty good year there, so they just didn't sign me the next year. I was a free agent, so the only team that I could find that would take me was Washington. And so Tom McVie came out to, first of all, I went to, during that summer, I went to Washington and I went through to see all their doctors and stuff like that. So they signed me, and McVie put me on this program to get in shape. So I was supposed to go running and do this and do that and do this and do that, all this kind of stuff. And so then near the end of the summer, just before training camp, or a couple of weeks before training camp, he calls me and he has a real deep voice. He says, "Hi, Gary, how's the training going?" And I said, "Oh, okay, pretty good, Tommy," and stuff like that. He said, "Well, I'm going to be out there tomorrow. Pick me up at the airport in Reno." I was living in Lake Tahoe, so I had to go pick McVie up at the airport. And then so he comes up, he stays at my house in Lake Tahoe, and we're going on this training regimen that I'm supposed to be on during the summer to get in shape for his training camp. And so I'm on none of it, and I'm just in terrible shape. And he comes out, and I have to go running with him in Lake Tahoe. And so we go up to the track that I had tried to run a couple of times but in Lake Tahoe, you're at high altitude, 7,000 feet altitude, and it's hard to breathe up there. And then so he goes up, and I'm supposed to be going, a quarter in so many seconds, quarter mile in so many seconds, and then the next quarter in so many, and taking a 30-second break, and just his training regimen that he makes you go through. Mm-hmm. So I can do none of it. So anyway, so he's not too happy with me, but he's a great guy, and we have a great time. But he's not too happy with me being in terrible shape. So we go to training camp, and he runs the toughest training camp that anybody, other than Bert Olmsted, anybody has ever thought about doing in their lives. And so we go through that training camp, and I make it through training camp, but I can't do any of these like I can't do a mile in under 7 minutes, and I can't do this and I can't do that. So training camp is you're going through 2 practices a day, and then in the meantime I go running in the rink in Hershey, Pennsylvania, up around the rink there, thinking I'm going to fall down all the time because the rink's so high. And anyway, I make the team, but I'm kind of like the second or third goalie there. I play a few games, and we did have kind of a poor team in Washington, and all a bunch of young kids or old guys like me that are really can't contribute too much anymore. And so at one point, I play my last game, and we win my last game. Can't remember who it was against. Anyway, I win my last game, but then we decided to go play for youth, or go with youth. So they go with Jim Bedard, who was a young goalie, and so it's we go 10 games, 15 games. Turns out 35 games or 32 games without a win. And meanwhile, I'm doing everything that Tommy wants me to do. I'm at the exact weight he wanted to be, which was 209 pounds. I haven't gone on the road in 2 months, and but I have to go to the dressing room. I just go to practice. He makes me do extra stuff in practice, and he says to the guys that I'm a good example to the other guys in the team, but because he'd say, "Look at that guy over there, Smith." He says, "He's here for practice every day. I haven't played him in 2 months. He's here on time for practice every day. He's 209 pounds. He does the extra work, and he never complains about it. And, take a look at him and everything." And so I'm saying, yeah, isn't this great? And I go down to practice, or I go down after a game. Meanwhile, my friend Louis Manny gets the job as general manager in Minnesota. He went from player to general manager in Minnesota. So I called Louis Manny, and I said, "Louis, I hate it here in Washington. Would you take me back in Minnesota?" And he said, "Okay, we're going to be playing in Minnesota on Sunday night, and I'll talk to Max McNabb about it." But he said, "Yeah, I'd like you to come back here." So anyway, but meanwhile, before this must have been on a Wednesday or something when we lost our 32nd game in in a row in Washington. So they were playing in Cleveland the next night. So I go down to the room after we lose the game, and I said, am I going on the road, Tommy? And I would do that, 15 times before, and he'd say, no. He said, just see you next practice. And so he said, yeah, you know what? He says, maybe. He says, you try all the time, and you never give me any aggravation and everything, and you're a good example for the other guys on the team. He said, why don't you come on the road with us? I said, okay. So I was happy to get out of town. So I go on the road to Cleveland, and Jim Bedard gets hurt in warm-up. And so I got to play. I haven't played in 3 months. And so I go in and play in Cleveland, and we win the game. So I won the game before we started the 32-game losing streak. And then I win the game to end the 30-game losing streak, and we go back and we play a game on Friday night, and I don't play. I'm back up in the stands, not even dressed. So then anyway, and Lee has already called Max McNabb to see if I'll come back to go back to Minnesota, where I was the next year, and I did blue in Minnesota the year before, but Ted Harris is over there, and Louis Laney's in. So Louis goes in when he comes to Washington. He talks to Max, and he said, do you mind if I take Gary Smith off your hands? And so Max says, if you'll take Gary Smith off our hands, we'll pay half the salary. So I go back with Minnesota, to Minnesota, with them. And this is funny. So he plays me in 3 games. First 3 games, I'm there for 3 games. And I played great in Minnesota. We win 1, we lose 1, and we tie 1. And I was second star of all 3 games. Wow. And I think they scored 3 goals on me in each game. And so Louis comes down to me. We're in St. Louis. And Louis comes down to me after the game. He said, what the hell are you doing? And I said, I don't know. I said, I think I'm playing pretty good. And he says, we're trying to lose. We're trying to be in last place to get Bobby Smith in the draft, the first player in the draft. He said, I'm going to send you to Fort Worth, and so we can finish in last place. So that's why he got me. They want to finish in last place. And I said, Louis, I got a little left in the tank. And he says, well, we'll go down to Fort Worth, and they got a team there that's fighting to make the playoffs, and they got a pretty good shot at it, I think. So we go down to Fort Worth. Louis and I go down on the plane the next morning from St. Louis, and I sign a contract with Louis, a 2-year contract, $75,000 a year on a napkin while we're having a cocktail on the plane. So he says, just try to play half decent down here, help these guys, and you got a 2-year contract when you come back. So I signed it on a napkin. So I go down to Fort Worth, and I can play there for fun. It's the minor leagues, and I can still play in the NHL. And so I go down there, and we play good, and Billy McMillan is our coach, and he's a guy I played at St. Mike's with. So he lets me do whatever I want and everything, and he plays me all the time, and I'm having a great time going down there playing for fun. And we win the championship down there. And then so I go back to Lake Tahoe, and during the summer, they finished in last, and they draft Bobby Smith, which was a good draft. And the team they beat out for finishing last was Washington. I don't know who they drafted. You'll have to look it up. And probably the wrong guy. Certainly not Bobby Smith. But so I hear on the TV that somehow Cleveland and Minnesota have merged, and they're the same team. So I called Louis. I said, Louis, what about this contract that we signed on the plane? And he said, well, I never registered. I never put it. I forgot about it. I never registered it. He said, I don't know if I'm going to have a job. So he said, I'll get back to you. And so then he gets back to me, and he says, well, it turns out I'm lucky enough to have a job. And we inherited 8 goalies from Cleveland, or maybe it was 5 goalies from Cleveland and 3 from Minnesota. So we have 8 guys under contract. And the guys under contract from Cleveland were Joe Meloche and that guy Jim Craig, who was on the Olympic team, and couple other guys. And Minnesota had 3 guys under contract, including Peter Lepresti and I don't know who, Paul Harrison, I think. And so he can't give me a job. And so anyway, he says, I'll try to find you a job somewhere else. So he finds me a job. He calls Pat Staples, and he finds me a job in Indianapolis the next year. So now I'm in Indianapolis.
And it's interesting. You mentioned the Indianapolis Racers. Who would have ever known, and I'm curious a little bit about the team because it fell apart quickly with Nelson Scalabania. But at the same time, unbeknownst to anybody, you're playing with 2 players who are 17, 18 years old, who would eventually become number 1 and 2 in the all-time NHL scoring records, Wayne Gretzky and Mark Messier. Can you talk a little bit about the first time you saw Wayne Gretzky and what your thoughts were?
Yeah, the first time I saw him is I drove all the way from Lake Tahoe, and it was the day before training camp started. And so I just brought my stuff down to training camp, my equipment. And so I heard of Wayne Gretzky, and I brought my equipment into the dressing room. And so I watched them practice because I got there late after drive. It was like training camp wasn't starting till the next day. And so I just brought my stuff into practice, and then I went out and I watched them, and his father was there and his mother, and I think his little brothers and sisters and stuff like that. But I watched them, and I took a look at them, and I said, yikes, is this kid something? And I said to myself, I'm going to be nice to this kid. And like I was just before training camp playing with some of the guys that are going to be on the team, and there's guys that have been in pro for many years, and he's 17 years old or 18 or whatever he was anyway. Messier wasn't there that day, but Gretzky, I thought, holy cow, is this guy going to be great? And then it seems to me. Oh, no, I was going to say something about Messier because I'm trying to think when he got there. I don't think he was there at the start of the year, but he may have been.
No, he wasn't.
So he wasn't there at the start of the year? I don't know.
They came later.
He came later. And so I went in, I introduced myself to Wayne, and I said, I'm pleased to meet you, Gary Smith, and stuff like that. He said to me, pleased to meet you, Mr. Smith. He said, I went to your first game, or my first game I saw in the NHL. My grandmother brought me to, we were up in the Grays at Maple Leaf Gardens, and you were playing for the Seals against the Leafs, and very pleased to meet you, and great that I'll be playing on the same team. Hopefully we're playing the same team together, and just treated me great, but I was like treated like a father. I would be his father or something.
Right.
You know, so I was really nice of him. Pat Stapleton was the coach and general manager, and he put Gretzky with me to room with when we went on the road. So I tried to teach him, how to be a pro, and was just really nice to him, and we got along great. And we just had a great time the little time I was there with him. And I remember the first game we played, and it was against Winnipeg, and I had played with Bobby Hull in Chicago, as we mentioned earlier, and Gretzky was playing. I think they both got, I'm not sure, but I think they both got a hat trick, or one of them got a hat trick, and one of them got a couple of goals. And but we had, in Indianapolis, we were, the old guys like me and a bunch of other old guys were near the end of their career, and the young guys like Gretzky, the guys coming up. So it was kind of a mishmash up there, but we all got along great, and it was the only time I saw the first time I saw the WHA, and we weren't good enough to compete there. And also Scalabania, all he was doing was showing off Gretzky so he could get him somewhere else. Mm-hmm. And the team was destined to go under from the day we got there. We never got paid like our meal money for training camp, and we missed our paychecks and stuff like that. So it was kind of like a bad deal in Indianapolis. And then they traded, and I was a good friend of Whitey Stapleton, and another guy, Rod Zane, a friend of mine from Ottawa, he was the assistant GM. So I basically knew what was going on and we were hanging on for dear life, and where we would get our paychecks from, and when we'd get them, and things like that. So then they sold Gretzky, and that was it. And we played 3 home games after they sold Gretzky, and a guy named Peter Driscoll and Eddie Mio, and they went to Edmonton. And then we never got paid for the 3 games, then they pulled the plug.
Wow.
And we folded. So I had to drive with my family back 2 cars back to Lake Tahoe from Indianapolis. And I remember getting my equipment and taking my sticks and stuff from there in case I might ever play again. And then there was 2 sweaters hanging there that weren't there. There was Messier and Messier, he'd already gone or something. He was still with us. So there was only 1 sweater. It was Gretzky Sweater. And I said, should I take this sweater? And I said, no. I said, it's not my place to take it. So I left it there. And I took my sweater. So then anyway, I went back to Lake Tahoe for several months. And my wife was always bugging me, get a job. This team lost, call there and see if you can get a job. And so on Super Bowl Sunday, Winnipeg had lost the night before, and it was Super Bowl Sunday, and she was bugging me, and she said, why don't you call Winnipeg? They lost tonight. They need some help in goal. And this was at least 2 months after I had played. Mm-hmm. So but I want to get the hell away from her because she's bugging me so much. So I called Winnipeg Jets, and thinking that nobody's going to be in the office on the Sunday morning of the Super Bowl. And so I called them, and a male answers the phone. He says, hello, and I said, is John Ferguson there? He says, speaking. So I say, oh, no, to myself. I said, John, it's Gary Smith. I was wondering, I see you got beat last night. I was wondering if you needed any help in goal. So he said, hey, Freddy, how you doing? And I said, well, I've been trying to get a job somewhere. And he said, I got 2 goalies here. And he said, I like one of them, and I'm not so happy with the other one. He said, I'll think about it. So a phone rings, and about a week later, and when I thought there was a chance that I could play, I went out to Squaw Valley Arena, and I tried to play just a pickup hockey, and I couldn't stop a balloon. I hadn't played in 2 months, and I had ballooned up to about 240. And so anyway, he did call me a week later. He said, can you be in Winnipeg tonight because we're going on the road, or maybe tomorrow night because we're going on the road for a week, and I want to get you organized. And he says, I'll give you $10,000 for the rest of the year. There was only about 8 games or something the rest of the year, and I just wanted to get the heck out of there. Mm-hmm. So out of Lake Tahoe, and so I said, okay, I'll go. So I go, and it's land in Winnipeg, and it's 40 below, and so I got to drive to the hotel, and the next morning I got to go to the rink, and I can't get a cab because the cabs aren't even starting. So I go there, and I'm late for practice. I had to drag all my equipment across from the hotel, which is, about maybe a half mile of rink at 40 degrees below zero. I had to drag my pads and everything and equipment over there, so I don't make it for practice. And so I see Fergie sitting up there watching practice, so I go up and I talk to him. He said, okay, $10,000 a year for the rest of the year. He said, I want you to practice with the University of Winnipeg. We're leaving the next morning. We're playing that they played that night anyway. So it was the next morning, I guess, I dragged my stuff across there and I talked to Fergie. But the night before, they played Edmonton, so I go watch the game. And so it wasn't the next day till I dragged my equipment off there. So anyway, so then after the game, I went out with the Edmonton guys, Gretzky, and Nace Bailey that I played with in Washington. And so we go out, and the next morning I drag my stuff across. So then they leave, and then so I'm supposed to, the next morning I wake up after they've left, and my foot is hurting like mad, and I can't even walk. And so I can't practice with Winnipeg or the university. And so I'm there all week, and I call somebody from the office, and I can't get a hold of everybody's gone. And so Monday till Thursday, I finally get hold of somebody in the office, and they set up a doctor's appointment when I can't even walk. And I go to see the doctor, and the doctor says, "You've got gout." And he gives me a couple of pills, and the gout is better. So, but I hadn't practiced with anybody. But the night after I went to the game, I went through the wives' room, and it's getting a little jumbled, but who do I see in the wives' room is Tommy McVie. After I had already agreed to, I guess I didn't agree till the next morning to sign with him for $10,000, but who do I see but Tommy McVie in the dressing room. In the wives' room, after I'm leaving the dressing room of the Jets. So I said, "Tommy," I said, "what are you doing here?" And he said, "I came for the weather." Pretty below. And so anyway, then I go to practice the next day late, and I see Fergie there, and I agree to stay for, till they come back. So they come back, and I haven't practiced at all. And Fergie, the coach was Larry Hillman at the time, and he says to me, he said, "Fergie," he said, "how are you?" And I said, "I haven't played for 2 months, 3 months. I'm not ready to play." And he said, "Okay." He says, "Fergie told me to play you." And he said, so I'm not going to play you, I'm going to dress you, but I'm not going to play you. So Joe Daly, I think, plays. And so anyway, then they fire Larry Hillman that night after the game. And who is the coach but Tom McVie? They announced him as the coach the next day. Mm-hmm. And if I had ever known that Tom McVie was going to be the coach, and I probably should have known, because I did see him there a week earlier before they went on the road, I would have never played for the Winnipeg Jets.
Right.
Because of my experience in Washington. Now, he is a good friend of mine, Tom McVie, but I wasn't able to go through that again. I wouldn't have been able to go through what I had to go through in Washington again, and I would never have done it. So here I am, and I have to go through it again. So here I go through the same things, 30 pounds overweight, trying to get me down and doing all these extra things that you have to do to lose the 30 pounds and to get yourself in shape to play. And I go through it, and I go through it, and I go through it. And there's about 4 games or 5 games left in the year. And we played a game against, an exhibition game against Finland, some team from Finland. Mm-hmm. And he puts me in there. He figures this is a good time to put me in there. And I play. I remember breaking my blade on my skate during the game. My blade was broken, and I had to play in a broken blade. And I thought I was going to break my ankle and break my leg, but I didn't want to be taken out of there. So I played half decent, and then the guy fixed the blade on my skates, put a new blade on for the next practice the next morning. So he plays me in a league game, and I play all right. And I'm still going through all this stuff in practice, having to play way harder than everybody else. So then I play another game, and I play all right. Then I play another game, and I play all right. So then the playoffs start, and we win 4 straight against Quebec, and he plays me.
Right.
Then we got to play against Edmonton, so he plays me. I went in Edmonton and played the 2 best games I've ever played in my life in Edmonton, or in the first game, the first 2 at home, no, the first 2 games in Edmonton were in Edmonton, and I played the 2 of the best games I've ever played in my life. So we come back, and I think just what was going on hits me, and I play terrible in Winnipeg. So we're up 2-1. Then we play the 3rd game, and we win it. So we're going back to Edmonton. I think maybe one of the two games at home anyway. So we go back to Edmonton, and we lose badly there. And then I'm wondering if he's going to play me at home. He plays me at home. And Terry Ruskowski had a real bad shoulder, and he came back and played really good, and was real lifted. He played, and we beat them, and we beat them. We win the AFCO Cup in Winnipeg. If we would have went to another two games in Edmonton, we never would have beat them. Because, they were so good. And it just worked out that we beat them. And Tom McVie did it to me again, And, I got to thank him. Thank you, Tommy, for doing it, but I never would have done it. If I knew you were the coach, I would have quit. Right. I would have never done it.
Well, thankfully you didn't. And thankfully, I was going to say, thankfully you didn't. Thankfully, your wife on Super Bowl Sunday encouraged you to make that call. You changed, or helped to change, Winnipeg hockey fortunes permanently. And I did have a question for you, though. That Arrows team, we've talked about it on the show with Terry Ruskowski and Morris Lukowicz. That team is a combination. Just as you arrive and Larry Hillman's leaving, you've got two factions: Houston Arrows, Terry Ruskowski, Boris Lukowicz, Scott Campbell, etc. And you have the old-time Jets, the Lyle Moffats, Bobby Guindons, Kent Nilsson, Willie Lindstrom, etc. So they were having a hard time meshing. And one of the things that these guys always talk about is that how Tom McVie helped them become a cohesive unit. And obviously your arrival, as Morris noted, was a huge factor as well. Talk a little bit about the camaraderie on that group that you experienced in that championship run.
Well, I didn't know anything about this because I came really late in the year with only about 15 games left, something like that. And I thought that, and if he wasn't there yet, it was Larry Hillman. And I didn't know. I was just trying to do what I was supposed to do. But I didn't go there to be the regular goalie. I went there just to be like a spare goalie, is what I thought I was going there to be. And the guys were all really nice to me. I stayed at different guys' houses, just slept on the couch at Tim Claxton's place, him and Glenn Hicks, and Richie Preston's place, and Scott Campbell's place. I slept at all their places, and Paul Derbenchi, because I didn't have a home or anything there. And I thought that they were, the guys from the WHA, I didn't know. I didn't know how good hockey players Ruskowski and Lukowicz and Scott Campbell were because I'd never played against them. I never heard of them because they were in the other league. I had been in the National Hockey League until the start of this year, and I didn't know who these guys were. And when I got there and I saw what good hockey players these guys were, Terry Ruskowski and Kent Nielsen and Lukowicz. Lukowicz reminded me of Rocket Richard. All he saw was the goal, and his eyes just lit up and that's what he was, a strict goal scorer. When he got the puck, it wasn't going to anybody else. He was just going towards that net, and he was going to put it in the net. Right. And Ruskowski, what a great team guy he was. He was just such a great, he just offered his body up every night, and a little guy, and he would fight anybody and hit anybody, and like 165 pounds. He reminded me of Makita. And Scott Campbell, he was a big stay-at-home defenseman, reminded me of a Doug Harvey, basically. And, and I didn't know that there was any, I heard after about the guys from Houston weren't getting on with the guys from Winnipeg, and guys from Winnipeg that were left were just pluggers. The Guindons and the Lyle Moffats and stuff like that. They just were like the third and fourth liners. And then, of course, Kent Nielsen. But he never was with Houston, I don't think. I don't know how they ever got him there. How did they get him there?
Yeah, he signed in 77. He came directly from Sweden for the 77-78 season, the year before. Yeah.
He might have been the most talented hockey player, other than Gretzky, of course, that I ever played with, Kent Nielsen. And he had the hardest shot that I ever saw and couldn't see. I remember one time at the McVie had him in extra work for me. He had Nielsen out there shooting pucks at me from the blue line, rapid fire. and I couldn't even see them. and they were going off my shoulder and over my head and hitting the post or in the net. And McVie just said, "Stop it." He ended practice. He blew his whistle. He said, "Stop it." He says, "This guy's got 2 kids to feed," meaning me, and Nielsen was going to kill me. And because I couldn't see his shots from the blue line, they were so hard.
Yeah, I think Gretzky once said he was probably the most talented player he had seen to that point in his career, and he certainly proved it in the National Hockey League as well.
And he was not only talented at hockey, he was like a great soccer player apparently in his own land. And when I was going on all these extra things that McVie was making me do up in Winnipeg Arena, because it was 20 degrees below outside, I had to do all this running in the arena, I would see Nielsen up there running with a soccer ball, kicking it all around and off the seats and onto his feet and everything. And I understand now that his wife is a professional golfer, and he's her caddy.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, that's neat. He was a really great guy, and he really had a beautiful young wife. I didn't know she was an athlete, but I did know she was an athlete. Apparently, she was like, they play some kind of like a type of a volleyball type, different volleyball that she was on the national team at the time in Sweden.
You mentioned Kent Nilsson, and it's also kind of bittersweet. Players like Kent Nilsson and Terry Raskowski, Rich Preston, all are taken from the Jets as you enter the National Hockey League. So the championship team is pretty well decimated when you get into the NHL. What are your memories of that first NHL season?
Well, and another guy that we did have in Winnipeg and that was vital to winning the championship in Winnipeg was Lars-Erik Schuberg.
Oh, yeah.
He was, remind me of Pat Stapleton. He was among the best defensemen that I ever played with, for sure. And I think if he would have played, in the prime that he was playing in the WHA and the NHL, he would be remembered as one of the better defensemen ever in the National Hockey League. So the next year we went there, losing those guys. Richie Preston was a real good up-and-down winger. He went on to score 25 and 30 goals a year for Chicago. We lost Raskowski, and basically they protected Nielsen and Scott Campbell. That's who they protected, wasn't it?
It was actually Lukowicz and Scott Campbell.
Lukowicz. So we lost Nielsen. Yeah. So, we could only protect 2 guys, and the draft was brutal for expansion teams in those days, and so we kept the Moffats and the Gindons, and then everybody else's Hilliard Graves, and we made a mistake on the first draft choice that we took, Jimmy Mann. He could beat up against the kids in the junior, but as a pro, he couldn't beat up on anybody, so he wasn't much of a player to certainly build around, and so that was a mistake. Nice kid, but wasn't an NHL-type player, even at the bottom ring. And so basically, McVie wanted me to play again all the time, and I was basically, at that time, a third goalie. So I played at the start of the year, and he put me in there night after night after night, and so I just I wasn't getting paid at the time. At that time, I got my salary garnished by the Canadian government for income taxes that I had paid that I hadn't paid when I was in Vancouver, because I had a write-off. My agent, his name was Edmund McMullen at the time, was in the movie business, and I put my money into movies, and turns out it was all a little bit of a scam, but I knew nothing about it. I lost all my money, and at that time the money I was making from the Jets were being garnished by the Canadian government, and I ended up having to pay it for 10 years after that. Oof. So I asked Ferguson if I could go play in the minors and get paid in the minors, and he said yes. He looked into it, and he said, yes, you can get paid in Tulsa. So I asked to be sent to Tulsa. So I was only with the team for about, 20 games or something like that, and I played about 12 of them, and I won about 3, and basically couldn't play for an expansion team anymore in the National Hockey League. So that's how I ended my career.
So, Gary...
That's my whole story. You'll have to put it on 2 episodes or whatever.
There's no question. And I wanted to ask you just 2 more quick questions. Number one was, when your career is over, you know it's over in 1980, what's that adjustment like? I know some players have a difficult time. You've played for a long time, almost your entire life. What's that first year, 80, 81, like outside of hockey?
Well, fortunately, I was still in hockey. I had signed a 2-year contract with Ferguson, and I was living at that time. I moved to Phoenix, and I was a scout for Winnipeg, living in Phoenix. And so basically I went to training camp. I went to a few games during the year, and one of the assignments I got during the year, so I was still in hockey at that time, and was to go to the high school tournament in Minnesota, and for the entire tournament, and it's just fantastic hockey I learned. And I went in there. There was only one other guy in hockey that was there for the whole tournament, and that was Scotty Bowman. So there's Scotty Bowman and myself going and watching this tournament. And the player that I saw and he saw for this entire tournament was Phil Housley. So my only guy I saw that could play in the National Hockey League all winter there was Phil Housley. I went to a few games in San Diego scouting a university out there called International University, and they had nobody that was any good to play out there in the National Hockey League. So then I went to the end of the season to our meetings in Montreal, and the guy that I was trying to say to draft for their first draft choice, because they lost so many games that year, was Phil Housley, and so I was trying to push him, and then Winnipeg, of course, had to take Dale Hawerchuk, and then my contract was up, and then the next year I was out of hockey, so I knew I was finished, and so I got a job at the racetrack in Phoenix because I love the racetrack, and so I didn't miss hockey that much, and then a couple of years later, then you get to miss it, and you're out of the game, and you still have your memories of the guys in the game and the good guys you've met, and all along the line, and really when you get older, it comes back more to you, I think. I'm 75 now, and I think I'm more popular when I'm 75 than I was when I was 35, because there's a lot of things that come up. People ask you to do books, and I just was involved with a part of a book with, it's called 23 to Win.
Right.
Out this year. They interviewed me for that, and they sent me a copy, and it's a wonderful book. And each night I go to sleep and I read one of the other 23 guys' stories. There's Frank Mahovlich in there, and Nick Beverly I played with. I'm trying to figure if anybody else I played with. There's a lot of guys I didn't know. Dominic Hasek is the other goalie. I didn't know him, and certainly great to hear his story. A lot of guys from Europe in there that have great stories they tell about how they got to the NHL and who they play for. I have in my 23 guys, I have guys like Bobby Hull, Gretzky, Harry Howell, Pat Stapleton, Bill White, Don Lever. Don Lever would be my captain. He was the guy that I was most impressed with my whole life in professional hockey.
Wow.
Don Lever. Normie Ferguson, I don't know if I mentioned him. Jim McKinney, Mike Walton. This was a real interesting type of thing that you had to do. You had to put a player in the position that he was on your team. Like, say, Don Lever was number 1 left winger in my team. Then I had to fit him into number 1 left winger in the whole team above Bobby Hull. I couldn't put Bobby Hull in there because I was able to pick Bobby Hull because I only played with him 1 year in Winnipeg and 1 year in in Chicago. So I had to put him where he fit in to the games. It's a long thing to try and explain it to you, where they had to fit in. There was a lot of players I couldn't fit in. Guys like Dennis Kearns in Vancouver, I wanted to put him in there, but he just didn't fit in the proper spot the way he was on the Vancouver team, because maybe he was my number one defenseman, and I had already put Pat Stapleton in there as the number one defenseman, and I couldn't use him. And a lot of guys like that I couldn't do. But I tried to put my friends in and the guys that I was most impressed with on and off the ice in my team. And I think I had a pretty good team. We got beat out first round in the playoffs, and whoever was picking for it in the book. But at least we made the playoffs. There were some guys that didn't make the playoffs.
Right.
The teams that they played, I made the playoffs. They gave me a team called Smitty Stars or something like that. You'll have to get the book.
Well, we're definitely going to get the book now, and we'll review it on the show. But in the meanwhile, Gary, I've been looking forward to this interview for quite some time, and it was even better than I anticipated that it would be. Greatly appreciate the time. Certainly, as I said, to open the show, one of the most entertaining, respected, and durable players of your generation. And we greatly appreciate you sharing your stories here today. And we know the fans greatly appreciate that as well. So thank you so much. Greatly appreciate it.
Well, I thank you, Mark, and good luck with your show. And it's just great that there's someone out there that has a show like this that can hear people's degree, careers at different way that they grew up. But I tried to give him my whole career, and I think you got it.
I did. It was beautiful. I greatly appreciate it. Gary, look forward to talking to you again soon. And again, thank you so much.
Thank you, Mark.
Thanks for listening to the Pro Hockey Alumni Podcast, the voice of hockey legends. Just a reminder to please consider giving the show a rating and or review on Apple Podcasts. The link is in the show notes. These ratings and reviews help us become a lot more visible and make the show more accessible to hockey fans everywhere. I personally read all the reviews and greatly appreciate them all. If you have thoughts or suggestions for the show, you can contact us through our website at prohockeyalumni.org, or be sure to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube at Pro Hockey Alumni. Thanks for listening.